our last presentation in the methods track, we have Lanre Ijishakin. Lanre is a user experience researcher and a part-time professor in the Human-Centered Design program at Algonquin College in Ottawa. In her presentation, Rethinking User Research, a roadmap for inclusive design, Lanre demonstrates how accessibility plays an important role in the field of user research and the transformative power it has in promoting equity and enhancing user satisfaction.
Hi everyone, my name is Lanre Ijishakin. I am a user experience researcher and I work with IMID. I support him in building inclusive and accessible product. So today I will be sharing with us Rethinking User Research, a roadmap for inclusive design. I hope you're going to gain valuable tips that will help you to build inclusive product that is usable by everyone. So in my presentation, I'll be covering three main areas: average user concept, the importance of inclusive design, strategy for creating inclusive products and services. And I will leave us with some call to actions that we can use going forward. So what do we mean by average user concept? This is something that we are very much familiar with as researchers and even product managers and designers. When we share research reports, we are most times looking for majority of users to build products for. So we say things like, oh, 90% of the users want this. And most times we design products for majority of the people. But then who are you designing for? Like I mentioned, maybe the question should be, who should you be designing for? I'm going to introduce to you Rose. She's a marketing manager, so she relies on online shopping to get her groceries and her household items. This looks like a perfect user to us. What are we designing for here? You want to make sure that Rose can navigate the online website to shop effectively, very fastly, and be able to get things on deals or promotional items. So we focus on this when we're designing for a typical user like this. However, I would like to reintroduce Rose to us. Rose is visually impaired and relies on magnification to navigate websites. And so when we're designing for Rose, there are other things that we need to consider to make this platform efficient and effective for her. And that brings us to, who should you consider in your product design? Like I mentioned earlier on, average user is always at the center point. And so if you look at this bell curve, the average user covers the majority of the sample. There are other people at the extreme right and extreme left. And when you look at this, these are minority that might just account for 10%, 15% of our research findings. Do we actually consider people with disability when we are designing our product? Do we get information from them? Do we understand their needs? Do we include them in the research in the first place? And when we include them, are we conscious of what their own experiences are and make sure that they're not just minority experience or one-off reports in our research findings that we don't account for what they need to be able to use our product effectively? I'm going to share with you a scenario. So imagine that you design a product for someone, average user, but then this user needs to use this product on their mobile phone. If the product is not designed to be responsive, then it's difficult for them to be able to navigate on their phone, scrolling through the website. And this experience is similar for someone who uses magnification. Someone using magnification has a very limited viewport when they are looking at the web screen. And so when you design a website to be responsive, then you make it easier for someone who decide to use it on their phone or someone who decide to magnify their screen and reduce their viewport to a particular session. So this enables us to be able to meet the needs of a diverse group of people. And also when you look at people working under stress, that makes you to not be fully focused. And at that point, you don't need a lot of information or things that will make you to have so much mental load in trying to figure out what you want to do on that website. So when you consider these people who are neurodivergent, then someone who is working under stress will be able to benefit from the simplicity of that design and be able to navigate through your website and access information or complete their task. So talking about the importance of inclusive design, I love this quote from Paul Smith, the head of accessibility team in Berkeley. He says, embracing accessibility leads to multiple benefits, reduces legal risk, strengthens brand presence, improves customer experience, and colleague productivity. This is very true. A lot of times when you're just designing just for average users, we don't get into that creativity of actually doing something that is out of the box because we are just focused on getting the product out. And so our research scope and our design scope are just limited to, certain features that we just get the product shipped, but not, thinking about new frontiers that can make life easier and better for people. Also, there's a huge cost associated with neglecting inclusive design in business. Like I mentioned earlier on from that bell curve chart, that there are minority groups that when we neglect them, we do not take care of their needs and their product. I'm going to present to you here that there is over 1.3 billion people living with one form of disability or the other. That is a huge minority group. That when you don't account for these people in your research, in your design, in your product development, you're missing out. And also, this group of people account for $13 trillion spending expenditure. They have a huge spending power. They have disposable income that they can shop with, they can buy things, they can use things the way everybody also use things. And so when you do not consider them, you're missing out on this huge market as a business owner. And the third thing is that the cost of fixing accessibility barrier is huge after the product has been released. In fact, research has shown that it could cost up to 100 times the cost that you would have invested at the beginning to fix the accessibility issue after the product has been released. So there's a huge cost associated to neglecting inclusive design and building products that are accessible. Like I was mentioning earlier on, that there are a lot of opportunities when we think outside the box, outside the norm in creating our product and designing our product. And one of the huge benefits of building products that are inclusive is that it drives innovation. I would like to share with you some of the technologies that we all use nowadays that were created primarily for people with disabilities, but now they are widely used by everyone. And I'm not surprised if we are familiar with some of these things. An example is audiobook. Audiobook helps someone who is non-sighted to listen and consume information. But this is something that a lot of people also use who are sighted. For instance, I have Audible on my phone, which helps me to read books faster than I would have if I just had to rely on the hard copy and sit down to read the book. I can listen to the book on the go, right? So this is an example of technology that was designed for accessibility but has benefited more than people in the disability community. Another one is phone with caption. I recently saw that on my Google Pixel, and I was so excited that I could use this feature because sometimes I'm in a noisy place and I want to receive a call. Even though I'm using my earpiece, I might not be able to hear everything the person is saying. So when I put on the caption, I'm able to correlate what I'm hearing and read it at the same time and make sense of the information. So this huge benefit of us designing with inclusion in mind, because it just benefit beyond the target group, or let me say the minority group. Other examples are text-to-speech and speech-to-text, which is like dictation, and then you translate it to text for us. What do we need to do to be able to build products that are inclusive? Primary things we need to do is to move implementation of accessibility to the very beginning of our product lifecycle. There's a research report from DQ University that says 60 to 70% of accessibility issues could be avoided or could be tackled at the design phase. So I have here the design or I would say product development cycle. So we have the discovery phase, we have the design validation phase, we have the development phase, we have the testing and QA phase, and then we have the launch and release. What we're saying is that you do not start implementing accessibility after the product has been released, which is the last phase. When people start, sending reports or people start providing feedback on your website that it doesn't work. You do not wait to implement accessibility at the quality assurance phase and testing phase, where engineers are testing and they now detect defect and then you have to go back and fix them. The best point to implement accessibility is at the discovery, design, and validation phase. And this concept is popularly known as shift accessibility left. So you shift accessibility left, in your product development, which is at the very beginning. And so we're going to look at things that we need to put in place to be able to achieve this. The first thing I would like us to consider is the accessibility principles, because these are the building blocks for building inclusive and accessible products. And so there are 4 principles that we have to consider. The first one is perceivable. And what does that mean? Perceivable means ensuring that everyone can consume the information on your website irrespective of their ability. So if somebody decides to listen to the content on your website, they can fully make sense of it and complete their task without seeing it. So the website or your product is not just built just for visual users. The second principle is operable. Operable means that irrespective of the input method that the user wants to use, they can interact with the user interface and be able to navigate around your website and complete their task. And so if someone decides to use keyboard and they do not want to use mouse, can they complete their tasks? Can they move around? Can they navigate around the website? So for instance, if you design a feature that involves drag and drop, do they have to rely on only mouse to drag and drop? Or can they use their keyboard and tap through and be able to complete that same task? The third principle is understandable, and this has to do with making sure that the navigation, the content layout and structure, and the content itself can be easily understood by people irrespective of their ability. So you make sure that it's simple enough, it's easy enough to understand by everyone. And lastly, we have robust. This principle talks about ensuring that irrespective of the technology the user is using, user agents, like Chrome, Firefox, Safari, they can have good experience with your product. And even if somebody is using assistive technology software, they can also interact with your website and your product effectively. So how do we implement shift left strategy in the early phase of our product lifecycle, which I mentioned earlier on as discovery phase and the design and validation phase? At the discovery phase, one key thing that we must ensure to do is that we include people with disability in our research. We should include them in our research sample to make sure that we account for their needs, for their motivations, and the limitations and pain point as well when we are building our product. Also, during the design and validation phase, we carefully consider our design system. A lot of times when a design system has barriers, accessibility barriers like low color contrast, and they are not designed with the mind that some people will use assistive technology to navigate the website, it is very much prone to be used and resort to products that will have a lot of accessibility defects. So, but when build our design system in a way that it is free of accessibility barrier, that reduces the risk of building products that are not accessible. Another thing we should consider is that when we are conducting our usability research, that we test our product with people with disability, or we test for people with disability. So even if you have constraints of having a functional prototype that has code base and you'll be able to use it to test with screen reader, you can actually simulate testing your prototype as if someone using screen reader is navigating that prototype to be able to understand how the experience will look like for someone using screen reader. And lastly, when we have to consider heuristic evaluation, for our product, we do not just limit it to just usability evaluation, but we include accessibility evaluation to look out for what are accessibility barriers and not just usability issues. When we say that we should include people with disability in our research, who are these people that we should be looking at? We should consider users who are neurodivergent. These are people who might find it difficult to read or have difficulty understanding things the way everyone would have understand things. They might be more visual based and they might need things to be made in a simpler way for them to easily understand it. So you considering including them in your research helps you to understand how they will prefer to navigate, whether that workflow makes sense to them, whether that workflow in your design is actually usable and easy for them to complete the task. Also looking at non-visual users, and this could be people who rely on screen reader or people who just prefer to use auditory senses to consume information. So there are even sighted users who prefer to just rely on, sometimes they want to use screen reader or read aloud to consume information. So when you include non-visual users, people who are blind, people who are who have low vision, when you include them in your research, that allows you to account for need of someone who do not rely on vision or visual designs to be able to consume information on your website or your product app or whatever it is. And thirdly, we have non-auditory users. So if you are designing products that require media content, you consider what the product will look like in terms of is there alternative way that they can consume this information without having to listen. And then non-mouse users, so people who decide to use keyboard or switch control to navigate the website, how effective is it for them to navigate the website? So when you include all these people, this actually makes it easier for you to build a product that is usable by everyone, because what that means is that you account for their need right from the beginning of your product development. There are other tips that can help us in achieving a good experience when we are conducting accessible research. And so I'm going to look at two areas, which is recruitment and reporting our findings. When we are recruiting participants who use assistive technology for our research, it is important that we focus on a wide spectrum of ability. And what I mean by that is that, for instance, if you want to do research with people who are non-visual, that they do not rely on visual presentation to consume information, you do not just focus on magnification user alone and leave people who use screen readers. And at the same thing, you don't focus on screen reader alone and neglect people who use magnification. You have to consider this wide range of abilities when you are selecting your participants for your research. Also, you have to critically consider the platform that you use for the research to make sure that this platform is accessible so that they can easily participate in your research, right? And then another thing is to engage gatekeepers. So a lot of times we find it difficult to get people to participate in our research. And what I mean is that people who use assistive technology, but there are companies that could help us to get these people to participate in our research. And I will also say that it is important that we provide the necessary support to participants who use assistive technology or who have one form of disability or the other, because this is very important for them to feel comfortable and their needs are met. So consider their accommodation, ask for what they will need to make them to effectively participate in your research. And looking at the reporting, what are the things that we need to consider? So typically when we conduct research, we are looking at generating research artifacts like journey map, personas, And what is important is that when we create this artifact, that we account for the need of people with disability. And it is important that we just don't limit it to average users. So if there's need for you to create a separate journey map for someone who use a type of technology to navigate the website, it is very important because their experience might be different from someone who does not use that particular assistive technology. So the workflow that will make sense for a screen reader user might be totally different from a virtual user. And so that is why it is important to consider all this when you're writing your report. That goes to when we are documenting our user stories and product requirements. So when we describe our product requirement, that we correctly and accurately specify what the needs are for people using assistive technology or people with disability who might be navigating without even using assistive technology but find a workaround. So how do we make sure that this product is easier for them to use? And lastly, is to ensure that our design they are properly annotated so that engineers can properly code for this experience. So for instance, what I mentioned earlier on for drag and drop, what is the alternative navigation available for someone who decides to use keyboard that would accurately account for that or describe that in our design annotation. So I would like to leave us with some actionable steps that can help us to begin to consider critically inclusive design in our product lifecycle. Number one thing I want to leave us with is that accessibility is everyone's responsibility. It is not just for engineers. It is not just for people doing quality assurance to figure out whether a product has defect or not. It is your responsibility if you're a researcher. It is your responsibility if you're a designer. It is your responsibility if you are a product manager or a product owner, because giving allocation in terms of budgetary allocation, resources for conducting research with people with disability, and also even accommodating that in your work plan is very important. So everyone involved in product development and service design has a role to play in building accessible products. Secondly, accessibility is not a project. It is a process. So it is not a one-off thing that you just tick off the checklist and you feel like, oh yeah, we are done. No, it is a process. There's a continuous effort that is required for us to build on what we're doing to make sure that we continue to improve the experience for people using assistive technology and people with disability. So how do we start moving in the direction of building products that are usable by everyone? The first thing I want to say is that we need to be intentional. We need to see it as something that we are deliberate about and we start working towards it. We are aware about the need. We get to know what are their needs of people using assistive technology or people with disability. You're intentionally knowing, willing to know, to understand and be able to solve for this problem. And the second thing I would say is that it is important to embrace diversity. Embracing diversity enables us to open our mind to different abilities, to different ways that people do things. And so that creates, an opportunity for us to be innovative, that allow us to be creative. When you understand that there's no one way to get things done, that makes us to begin to look at things in different possible ways, and innovations can come up from there. And the third thing I would say here is that we keep learning. So you learn forward, because like I said, accessibility is not a project, it's a process. So we need to continue to get feedback from people with disability and be humble enough to take their feedback and implement it in our product development. So if you receive a feedback from someone with disability, we should conduct further research to understand the issue and see how we can make that product a better experience for everyone. I would like to leave us with my final thoughts that building products that are inclusive is not just the responsibility that we think there's a job to be done, but has huge benefits even from business perspective. And so we should look at how do we, going forward, start making our product inclusive and make sure that everyone can use our product and we are part of people of a movement building products that are inclusive for everyone. Thank you so much for listening. I would like us to stay in touch. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn and we can continue the conversation from there. Thank you.
That concludes the methods track. A big thank you to all our speakers for sharing their expertise with DiscoConf. Next up, we'll have a short break and then conclude the day with our final keynote presentations.